quiet and.
You have to think, are these people Jewish? You know, that's the question, or even connected, you know. It is so wonderful to be here. This is the second leg of our Scholar in Residence weekend. It is a gift to have our teacher here. Danny Schiff is many things. Brilliant teacher, if you were here last night. A deep thinking theorist. You'll hear about a book, which is his recent work. I think an inspiring presenter and an outside the box rabbi in every way. He's also a gracious human being, and a long-standing colleague and friend and classmate. But today he has an added bonus or an added expertise. He is a specialist in idolatry. Now you might wonder, what is a specialist in idolatry? He can spot idol worship a mile away, right? Maybe a millennia away. And so he can help us understand why ancient Israel's creation of that golden calf somehow talks about or bespeaks what we're creating in the 21st century and how we can confront it in a sacred way. So it is with joy and gratitude for his presence, Rabbi Danny Schiff.
Good morning, everybody. It's a real delight to be in your presence. One of the reasons why it's a real delight for me is because I get to spend extended time with my friend, your Rabbi Serkman, and it's a joy to be together with you, but particularly to see the great esteem that your community rightfully has for you. And it's a joy because my real work in Jewish life these days is in adult learning. And therefore, to be in this context is to be in the place where I feel most at home. And I am going to essentially lead Chevrah Torah this morning. Rabbi Serkman asked me to assemble the texts, so all the texts here are my fault, and the way in which this session runs is going to be entirely sort of my style, and it's a great thing when a rabbi brings in a visiting scholar to do that, because what it means is you can then say, thank God we have Rabbi Serkman most of the time.
You will not say that. You will not say that. Not about Rabbi Schiff. No.
All right, so let's get into it. The parsha is Tisa, and there are many things that could be said about it. Every parsha has extraordinary amounts of material with which we could grapple, but we're going to the heart of the matter here, and the heart of the matter is, I believe, the event of the golden calf. Blessing.
That's right. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. Amen. I am muting everybody online because I can. With great power comes great responsibility. Did I mute everybody? Wait, can you mute everybody? I muted all. Oh, we muted? Okay.
All right, so what I want to do to begin with is to examine the 8 verses of the Torah that are in front of you, and I want to examine them in the light of the questions that I put in the koshi, right? So the questions that you have up above: what is idolatry? A definition. Is it an important societal problem that needs to be addressed? In other words, we could come up with a nice definition of idolatry, but if the response to idolatry is who cares, then it's not a very important matter. And why would it be an important problem to be addressed? So I'm going to ask somebody to read for us the pshat, the 8 verses that I've selected here from chapter 32. And while it's being read, because this really is, to put it into context, the major episode of idolatry that we find within the Torah. There are others, but this is, to be sure, the major one seen within Jewish history to be a transformative transgression on behalf of the Jewish people. So let's have somebody read the.
We're gonna go right around. Let's start, Lisa, go right around.
Perfect.
When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, the people gathered against Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who shall go before us, for that fellow Moses, the man who brought us from the land of Egypt, we do not know what is happening." Aaron said to them, "You men, take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and give them to." And all the people took off the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. This he took from them and cast in a mold and made it into a molten calf. And they exclaimed, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." Should I keep going?
We're gonna roll.
When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron announced, "Tomorrow shall be a festival of Adonai." Early next day, the people offered up burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. They sat down to eat and drink and then rose to dance. Adonai spoke to Moses, "Hurry down, for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have acted basely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I enjoined upon them. They have made themselves a molten calf and bowed low to it and sacrificed to it, saying, 'This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.'"
Terrific, thank you very much. So that's our pshat, right? A familiar passage, and in this familiar passage, we see the Jewish people, and this is the generation that was brought out of Egypt in very recent memory. We see the Jewish people who was freed from slavery and then comes to Mount Sinai and receives revelation in God's presence. We see that people in this particular context now almost immediately turn away from God, who has performed all these extraordinary interventions for them and delivered 10 commandments and Torah to them. They haven't quite got it in their hands yet, but they know what they're about to receive. And at this juncture, they see fit, because of some type of episode of anxiety or belief that things are not going in the way that they had anticipated, they see fit to build this golden calf. So my question to you, and here I'm opening this up for limited conversation. My question, tightly controlled, my question to you is, what is idolatry? And in your response, because that in and of itself is a difficult question to answer, in your response, I'm also curious about the second part. What is idolatry and why should we care? What is idolatry and why exactly should it be something we will worry about? Go ahead.
I'd say it's sort of an answer and a question, but the answer is replacing God with another God. The question would be, does it change any other behavior? Presumably, Adonai has a whole series of commandments, etc. Does the golden calf suggest different behavior by people?
And do you believe it does? Can everybody online hear the responses?
Yeah, you guys are good online, right? You hear, yeah, that we have the owl, which you can see looks like an owl,
Yeah.
which is brilliant. Yeah, so we hear.
Very good. Everybody, go ahead.
So the passage so far says nothing about behavior change. So I just leave it open at the moment.
So your response is idolatry is anything that would replace the worship of God with an alternative type of God. That would constitute idolatry.
Let's say if it changed behavior.
If it changed behavior. So if people started behaving differently because they worshipped whatever it was they worshipped, as opposed to worshiping God, then that would be idolatry and would be problematic. Okay,
I'd say yes.
go ahead.
Based on the prior text, we mentioned that Mount Sinai, after the first or the second utterance or thereabout of God, the Israelites told Moses, we can't listen to.
We can't deal with that, right?
We'll die, so please, you listen to the rest and tell us what you hear. Or what-"
Right, bring it to us.
And then he agreed. That is the beginning of potential for idolatry, because people remove themselves from direct relation at that moment and ask for an entity, an intermediary. Now, I understand there's Gemara text that said that's God looked upon that failure,
Mhm.
but it could be considered as the beginning of idolatry in Judaism.
But if that's the beginning of idolatry, then idolatry is almost becomes inevitable, right? Because at some point, God leaves off speaking to us collectively, and we have to rely upon the Torah, the tradition, the way it's interpreted and understood. And as a consequence, we become very susceptible in your formulation to idolatry because of that reality, because God doesn't give us instruction daily as to how to go on behaving. Is that right?
That's correct.
That's correct.
And we've also been permitted not, we were given dispensation not to listen to God
Where?
at Mount Sinai.
Because,
Because Moses was going to be the intermediary.
But when Moses is put in the position
So
of
then
being,
Moses then becomes a very important potential focus of idolatry himself.
so what's being discussed here is the question of how do we know what it is that God precisely wants? So at this particular juncture at Sinai, we know immediately what God wants because God speaks in the presence of the entire people. But at some point, the people say, whoa, too much God exposure. We can't take this. Why don't you, Moses, go up and receive it for us and then transmit it? So at that moment, when God stops speaking directly to the people and Moses becomes the intermediary, the argument is, well, there's the opening of the door for idolatry, right? Moses is presumably reliable, but what about when Moses isn't around anymore? Other people will put substitutes in. Now, that might be the least of our problems, right? Right, because essentially, if your agenda is, I can't speak to God, but I want to try and figure out what the correct message that God would want us to convey is, which is what rabbis do all the time, right? We don't speak to God, but we're going to try and figure out what the right message to convey is. Then at least we're trying to steer clear of the more gross idolatry that we see in the golden calf. So you're dealing with the most rarefied issue here. I'm still stuck on the golden calf itself, right? What does that golden calf constitute, and is it a danger beyond the golden calf, beyond this particular episode? Is idolatry something that we should continue to be concerned about in our contemporary environment? And if so, why? What's the big deal? Go ahead.
You know, before you go, Michael Feinberg's been waiting on the line, then we'll get to Chevrah. Michael.
Yeah, I note that it is Moses who is delayed. So the people are not replacing God, they're replacing Moses. They say, where is Moses? So in other words, this is not the beginning of idolatry. Idolatry precedes the golden calf. Moses himself has become something of an idol.
And idolatry precedes even this whole section of the Torah. You're absolutely right that idolatry certainly suffuses the Torah. It will come before the golden calf, it will come after the golden calf, but plainly, the golden calf is this enormous incident that latter rabbinic tradition is very focused upon. And therefore, it sets up the problem for us of what exactly idolatry constitutes. Other responses, go ahead.
What I'm thinking of is it replaces, because it's something physical, it replaces the deep spiritual connection that we have with God. And to me and that's going on in our society, all as I spoke last night, it's going on all over, and that concerns me tremendously.
But does that mean that if we were not dealing with a physical idol, but rather, for example, somebody made an idol out of something, out of an aspect of human spiritual life, that wouldn't then be idolatry?
And that's possible.
That's possible.
And of course, we've seen that in gurus, of course, and followings that took people down the wrong path.
Right.
But when we go deep within ourselves, you can find that,
Okay,
because that's where you can find God.
go ahead.
So as I see this question, if we exercise free will as modern Jews, is that idolatry? I want to approach Judaism different than what's written here.
Mhm.
I want to be a Jew, but I have my own ideas as to what's appropriate. Is that being an idol?
We will see a text shortly that will respond directly to your question, but what's your answer to your question?
My answer is, without free will, I might not, I wouldn't consider myself a Jew.
So free will is not idolatry.
Correct,
So,
but it depends how you do it.
it depends how you do it. A little bit too much and oops, right? So anything has the potential to become idolatrous depending on how we utilize it.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's an important clue to what we're talking about, right? The idol is not about the essence of the thing. It's about how we deal with the essence of the thing, right? How we approach the essence of the thing. Now, I want to get a couple of comments, if I can, about, is it something that, we got a long list of problems in today's world, right? Anybody who wants to start writing the list of challenges that are before us has a lot of paper to fill up. So is this one of them? I mean, is idolatry on the list of things that the Jews should really be focused upon in the 21st century? Is this a big deal, or is this just, we talk about it in Torah study, but realistically speaking, it's not such a phenomenal worry.
If you ask anybody in this room, would they be comfortable without free will in terms of approaching their Jewishness? I doubt that you'd get a negative answer.
Right, but I want to step back from defining the forms of idolatry and talk about idolatry more generally first. Go ahead.
Idolatry people could idolize money, for example.
Yes.
And if you're idolizing money, it depends then what you do with it. Billionaires, this woman this week gave $1 billion to, I think it was a Colombian. Einstein. Pretty good thing to do, right? Other people just want another one. And for what purpose, I don't know. So it depends what you want.
So let's assume that there are some people who are afflicted in our society with an idolatrous approach to money. Is that as a societal matter, something that we should be concerned about as a high order problem? Probably not. Go ahead.
Get Missy back there. Missy, after you get Missy.
Interesting that essentially what they were achieving out of it was a giant craft project that they made.
The giant craft project. That's how I want to describe this text in the future. The first giant craft project of Jewish history.
Ask Carol Schiff for what she's done in the past, and you'll understand. You'll understand why she said it.
And the issue for us today is that the kind of idolized things we made that bring us a lot of, fame or wealth or whatever.
Okay.
And we end up elevating ourselves when we idolize it and forgetting that we really need to remember our humility, that we're nothing.
So that was very well said. What you're expressing there is the idea that when we get focused on our own creations, it really becomes a narcissistic type of endeavor where we're obsessed with things we made rather than being obsessed with the creator of us all. And I think that's very well expressed. I'm still wondering is that really on the list of top 10 problems where we need, is it something, you know, should rabbis be battling idolatry? Should we be concerned as a Jewish community that idolatry is growing within our ranks? Is this something we should be really worried about, or is that just something that, well, yeah, it's one of those concerns, right? Who's I going to next?
Mitzi's in the back.
Yes, it is something that we should all be concerned about, because I think idolatry is looking to anyone or anything as a source of what only God can give. So if you're doing that, and God, if you're looking for something in someone or something else that God can give, you're never gonna receive it unless it's from God. So I think, yeah, that's something to be concerned about.
So we should be really concerned about it, because it essentially eclipses the true origin of where our vitality and our humanity originates, and puts that in the wrong place.
Exactly.
Okay, got it. Zeb.
But isn't idolatry itself a relative term?
I didn't hear.
Idolatry.
Yes.
Isn't it itself a relative term?
Is it a relative term?
Somebody else, it's not as that. It depends on how you define idolatry. So first you have to define idolatry.
First, we have to define idolatry.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
But society, people define it very simply.
Right, no, I think that's absolutely right, which is why what we were saying before is that idolatry has to do with the extent with which we utilize a particular object or concept in an improper fashion. But you're right that setting the boundaries of what is idolatrous and what's not idolatrous is a complicated matter. You'll probably want
You got Harry, Steve, Deb.
So, I think we've been discussing idolatry as a metaphor. Something, I don't hear a lot of sermons about idolatry. I'm sorry, Jeffrey, I don't,
You don't remember that great fire brimstone that I gave?
As a metaphor, it can sort of take on anything that you worship. I don't think that's what this text is about. The text seems to have a physicality. So it seems to me there are three things referenced in the portion we just read that are physical. One, it says, make me something, make me an idol. Make me doesn't say that, but it echoes the make me a mikdash. Right, this is almost the same language, but a different singular plural. The second is Moses. And the text says Moses was a man who led us. So are we worshiping Moses? That's the second physical thing. The third thing is the golden calf that they made. And I have a feeling that if we talk about it metaphorically as anything we worship, we've sort of watered the whole thing down. I mean, then it's anything. And then fine, you can say, well, we shouldn't worship money. Well, maybe we should, but anyway, if we can give $1 billion away, then we should. How did he collect that $1 billion we have in this? So it's fine to talk about that, but I think we don't talk about worshiping idols because we don't have, we've banished the physical idols, except for the Torah scrolls.
So your point is that idolatry, at least as we're understanding through this text, is a physical matter. It's not idolatry of a concept is not possible or is not included here.
Right, and the problem is the physical is a substitute for what we can't see or grasp, which is God.
But when you say that money is a different sort of problem, you're claiming that money is not a physical item.
I don't see in the temple, we may worship money in various ways, but I don't see it on the bima piled up where people are saying prayers to it. That's the kind of idol.
Oh, so that
sort of substitute in that physical way, I think, is the core.
And now we can see why we have to have a conversation about what idolatry constitutes, because if idolatry constitutes something that you pile up on the bima and worship, then plainly we're going to have a very limited range of things that are gonna be in the category of idolatry. I think that you're making it.
Limited but powerful.
I understand, but I think you're making,
Broad, but, okay, sure. we should
you're
worship
clearly
money,
making
all those
it
things we worship.
more narrow than our friends in the back are making it, who see it as a much broader societal problem.
We had Steve and Deb.
And then I want to move on to the.
Now we're moving.
Right.
I think two things. I think first, and I think this is a challenge for the rabbis as well as all of us, is that a vacuum was created when Moses didn't appear.
Mhm.
And as a result, we would like saying what's going on. And
But
even
Moses didn't appear for like 5 minutes, like one day is the
Yeah,
problem, right?
Right, and I think if you're a challenge for even for us today, rabbis and everybody, it's, you have to be patient, you can't just, and you end up going down a rabbit hole of that. To be things, but I also, it doesn't necessarily have to be money. If you ask my nieces who they work with, it's Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift, right.
That's their,
Uh-huh.
and.
Do you mean that seriously, that she's like an idolatrous figure?
They have to go to
They,
concert.
they worship her? I mean, it's one thing to be keen about something, you're allowed to be keen about, like, really love somebody's music and think this person is a role model, does that make her an idol?
Well, I mean, look at what happened in the sixties with the Beatles, you had
Uh-huh.
10,000 fans idolizing these people, I'm just.
Yeah, but I'm very cautious about using the term idolizing in the way that we sort of throw it around in contemporary culture. Does that really mean that the Beatles were an idolatrous worship source? I'm not, I mean, you're my idol. Okay, that sort of language is contemporary cultural language. But is that really what we're worrying about when we worry about idolatry? I'm not sure that those two things are in the same category. Deb.
I would say that to me, when you're talking about idolatry, it's more does it influence people's behavior?
Uh-huh.
So if our behavior is supposed to be based on God's commandments, on, how we're supposed to interact with each other and better the world. But if an idol, including Taylor Swift, and it depends on what her ethics and morality are, but these kids were saying, well, Taylor Swift says it's okay to debate, then I'm gonna debate for it. Taylor Swift said this, or money, how you get your money, if behavior is so poor in the way you obtain your money, then that's it's influencing your behavior. Certain, political politicians, if they influence people's behavior in a good or bad way, but they're saying it's okay for me to do this because this is what my idol, this thing that I'm worshiping is influencing me to do, then yes, it's an idol.
So essentially, you're talking about a God standing, right? Because if this particular person or concept commands me to behave in a certain way, as opposed, and I follow it, then it becomes an idol because it is taking me down a different path than the path that I would go down if I were following God. Is that the correct understanding? And that should be something that would concern us. Okay.
Do you want to finish out with Wood last comment? Wood, your last comment.
That was in the text. And it goes on throughout, the physicality, the sense that hyper-focus on physicality gets put into the category of idolatry. You go back to the Genesis story, you have the Nephilim, they're seen as demigods. They propagate with mankind. If God calls that evil, he wipes that out. He brings the flood.
Right.
You go later in the book of the Bible, and you have the sin of Baal. That's physicality. That is sin. That is called idolatry. Can an idea be idolatrous? Potentially, because you look at the Decalogue begins, will have no God before me. You have this whole body of presented literature that says even thinking about constitutes a violation. And the problem with all these stories is that you also look at the story of the Tower of Babel. There's a concern that what is called idolatry starts leading heavily into societal freedom. Moses comes off the mountain. Joshua goes, hey, it's the sound of war. Moses goes, no, it's not, it's a party. And he's not happy when he says it's music. The text anyway can lead us to at least argue that idolatry is connected to frenzy, is connected to a suspension of judgment, it is connected to just a breakdown. And it's not basically just saying, yeah, I'm waiting to the sweat concert. There seems to be a connection to something more. And the flip side is, it's not that it's something is Jewish, it's idolatry. Look at Abraham. Who does he break bread with? He breaks bread with Melchizedek. Clearly not a Jew, but there is Adam. So it's not just something, if you're not within Camp A,
Okay.
you're outside of it. It takes something more, and then more can be pretty rash.
So you've brought an impressive assembly of texts to make the point.
Need more.
To make the point that if something is to be idolatrous, it leads to a societal breakdown or fracture where the ongoing solidity of the societal civilizational enterprise is threatened. Am I understanding correctly? And that would be the reason why we ought to see it as being so problematic, because true idolatry puts cracks in the foundation of the solidity of our society. Correct?
It goes beyond simple cracks. It's I know everything, but
the pedestal starts wobbling. Got it. Okay, let's move on. I appreciate
the question.
I appreciate all these comments, but I want to put together a broad picture here and then try and make some draw some order from the chaos. So we're going to put a lot of things out there, and then we're going to put it together at the end. The Remez level. Some of you don't know, might not know Cassuto. Cassuto is Umberto Cassuto, a 19th century, late 19th century commentator, makes a very simple, straightforward comment here, which I think is nevertheless insightful, which is why I brought it. Cassuto says, they believe human beings can make a god, yet they do not realize that whatever human beings make has less power than they have. Right, so Cassuto's insight here is pretty straightforward, doesn't take a great deal of unearthing, it's not complicated. He's essentially saying to us, what were they thinking? They created something with their hands. They had been in God's presence. They knew the extraordinary power, the ultimate power they were dealing with. And now they thought all of a sudden that something that they built could be as powerful or could be more powerful than the creator, in other words, them. If you're making something, if you're creating something, ipso facto, Cassuto argues, obviously you can't create something more powerful than you. And therefore, if you can't create something more powerful than you, then why would you worship it? Because it goes to the heart of what was set up the back, which is you're essentially worshiping yourself, you're worshiping your own creation, and you're worshiping something less powerful than you because you created it. But here's the reason why I brought Cassuto. And, you know, you can see that I then brought Schiff. And I didn't bring Schiff here in order to say that I have some particular insight on the conversation, but rather in order to challenge Cassuto. Because what Cassuto wrote in the 19th century about the power of human beings to create something more powerful than us was certainly true in the 19th century. I wonder whether it continues to be true in the 21st century. So let me read Schiff because I know it. The Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom, and here I'm just, this is not even my own idea, I'm just citing Nick Bostrom here. The Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom depicts the coming human interaction with AI as being like children playing with a bomb. In Bostrom's view, the intelligence explosion that may emerge from self-learning AI could engulf us before we have a chance to step away. And these dangers could materialize, even if everybody plays by the rules and does not cut corners, an unlikely scenario, given the competitive advantages of gaining an edge. As a result, Bostrom deems the advent of superintelligence as, quote, quite possibly the most important and most daunting challenge humanity has ever faced. So my question to you, is Cassuto right? Given the technological environment in which we currently find ourselves, which I'm arguing is similar in kind to all technological issues going all the way back to the Tower of Babel, which obviously was a technological question that the Torah confronts, and yet different in magnitude. And sometimes magnitude impacts kind, right? The magnitude of the power that we attain might well impact the nature of what this thing ultimately represents. So my question here, and we're not going to spend much time here, I just want everybody to ponder the moment in which we find ourselves. My question is, does the advent of AI and what it portends, according to Bostrom, challenge Cassuto's notion that we as human beings are incapable of creating something that is more powerful than us? Go ahead.
My first thought is no, that God created the universe and the rules of the universe, the physics, the chemistry, everything else. AI is just trying to understand God.
Whatever is there already.
Yes, so the creation, I don't think AI is a creation, AI is an understanding of creation.
So there's no possibility, as far as you can surmise, that we will ultimately be superseded by a superintelligence that we create that ultimately might take the place of Homo sapiens, and that might view us as in a similar way to how we view the Neanderthals. And most of us don't really get too upset on a regular basis that the Neanderthals aren't around anymore. We think that life with Homo sapiens is just fine, and we shouldn't be too concerned that we might ultimately be the new Neanderthals who will be dispensed with the rise of a much more intelligent form, even if it's created by our own instigation.
I'd say maybe we could be replaced, but God couldn't be replaced.
So it wouldn't be a problem if we were replaced, as long as God is still in place.
I'm just suggesting that AI couldn't replace God. That would be, could replace humans, but not God.
Right, but I remind you, and here I'm just taking a little sidetrack into the heart of my thesis, but I remind you that we have this little idea, which certainly gets repeated. You know, you don't hear enough sermons about idolatry. You certainly hear enough sermons on the subject that we are created in the divine image. And if we are created in the divine image, then that certainly raises a fundamental question as to whether or not it is proper that we be superseded, and whether or not it is Jewishly acceptable that we would create something that might take the place of human beings or might seek to do so. And whether or not the power that Cassuto alleges, right? They built a car. It was an awful craft project. So don't get too excited. But AI is a bit more than an awful craft project, right? AI is a project. Bostrom is warning us, and he's not the only one. AI could easily get away from us, get away from our control. And if it did, programmed the right way, it could wreak great destruction on portions of humanity, or potentially humanity entirely. Is Cassuto right? Should we be worried? Go ahead. Right at the back in the blue.
in my business, working with an Orthodox owner of a company, I look at the age group here, he's 30. He lives on AI. It's amazing when I see him write to employees, vendors, myself, which are contrary to the Orthodox way of living. And he said, that's what I get from AI. And it's amazing how AI is taking over its life and believes that whatever comes out on that piece of paper, it's okay. And yet it's contrary to the Orthodox or conservative or reform. And it's just amazing to me.
Yeah, and
he's very beautiful.
And this is why in my book, I focus extensively on Reform and Conservative Judaism, because I feel I have the right to speak about the movements of which I'm a part, and I don't talk a lot about Orthodoxy, but your comment illustrates why Orthodoxy is just as challenged by these issues as non-Orthodoxy, because essentially until rabbis and serious Jewish thinkers and Jewish communities collectively start really wondering about what the appropriate Jewish response to these phenomena should be, we're simply plugging in old responses which may be inadequate. No, let me replace that, which are certainly inadequate to the challenges that we are confronting in this area.
Virginia's on. Virginia.
Yeah, I have a question. Artificial intelligence, what type of intelligence are we talking about? Rational, mathematical, the addition of facts? Does it have an element of subjectivity, of emotion, of bias? I don't know. That's a question I'm asking.
Artificial intelligence is going to be unlike human intelligence in that it obviously is not based on an organic body structure. And part of the unpredictability and therefore the variability of human intelligence is we can never really predict what a human being is going to do or how a human being is going to react, because we're such complex creatures in terms of our physical and chemical and emotional and environmental makeup. That is not true for AI. And AI therefore will have a much more narrow dimensionality, but it will have access to far more information upon which to base its decisions and its course of action than we could ever imagine, let alone hold in our mind at the same time. So it's a very different form of intelligence, but it would be a brave person who would say that a particular form of intelligence is superior to another, and the possibility of us creating a power that is in effect greater than our own capacity may well be very real at this juncture, and therefore we need to be very concerned that Cassuto may have been wrong in terms of his understanding of where human history was headed.
Seven.
But it's nothing new. It's always been that.
What has?
Computers, computers are artificial intelligence. It's just progression. It's just making something much more sophisticated. This is the idea.
Yeah, well, but here you and I have a disagreement, I think, because you know, there's nothing new under the sun, but there is, right? So sometimes the magnitude of a transformation does matter. So if you're saying there's nothing new in the sense that we've always been doing computing.
No, but magnitudes have always changed. There's always been magnitude change. So what are you saying? That this particular magnitude change is a bit bigger than previous magnitude change? When they invented the printing press, that was a magnitude change.
Yes, yes.
What's the difference?
The printing press can't wipe out humanity and replace us.
But progress it could.
Pardon?
Progress it. You know, it's just a matter of change.
Well, I would argue that there are in human affairs tipping points where you reach a certain technological reality, which then transforms the environment dramatically. And I think we're seeing that not just with AI, we're seeing that in a host of different areas that might well threaten the underpinnings of the type of civilization that we're trying to build. And at that particular juncture, it ought to become concerning to us.
But isn't that the case, and it's always been the case forever, that people always believe that,
No, I don't think so.
it's going to change, it's going to so radically change this particular world that some tragedy.
So your position is nothing to worry about. It's always been this way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cheryl.
I think Judaism's role in responding to this is showing our people the power that we still have in all of this. I think that what the internet has done from the onset is create a facade of instant gratification. And I think you can actually relate to the people with the golden calf very much so, because they wanted that instant gratification. And I think that turning to AI and all of these different resources is that sign of instant gratification. So I think for us, it's to show our people that maybe it's not instant, you know, spirituality isn't instant. It's something you have to constantly interact with and work with and search, and that's not what we're used to, this generation. We're not used to something taking time and having patience. And so I think we have to show the positive outset of that patience, what that can create versus the instant gratification.
So rabbis should get up in their pulpits and say, the instant gratification that you've been enjoying is really not something that is conducive. You ought to set that to one side. Is that right?
I think it's not that it's not conducive, it definitely shows the ways that it can be productive and helpful, but I think for the long term, for individuals, that isn't what's going to be so gratifying.
So the Jewish message, which is certainly a classic Jewish message, but would be really countercultural in our contemporary environment. The Jewish message should be, we are all too addicted to instant gratification, right? And because we're addicted to instant gratification, that is disorienting us in a way that is problematic, takes us away from the divine rather than closer to the divine. And therefore, we need to build a society wherein instant gratification is not anymore the focus of our lives. That would be a dramatic shakeup in the way most of us live, right?
It doesn't allow us to realize our individual talents.
Right, but you appreciate what you're asking for, right? What you're asking for is a dramatic reorganization of the way we live and work in our contemporary environment.
You would go over big in the 1930s, right? Just saying. All right, Philip, and then maybe we'll.
And then we'll go, move
Yeah,
on, right?
So, Rabbi Schiff, I've been thinking that pseudo seemingly was wrong, even in the look at Exodus. And the reason being that a little later in the story, when Aaron describes to Moses what happened with the calf, it's an amazing thing. He says, we put all the stuff in fire and out came this calf. As if they had not made it. He gave all sorts of
magic.
He gave it all sorts of power. And that doesn't come out of anywhere. It was that summer when I was leading on that Torah, I discovered that the name Israel, that the El has significance. El is a reference to a previous god, a bull.
Yep.
And so this calf, which never makes sense to me before, makes sense to me now. It's a reference to the God. So he's saying that the human beings made this God. But they wouldn't have thought so. They would have thought, here's the God El. And when Aaron describes it, it appeared out of the Bible.
And so you're saying that Kasuto was wrong even in that context?
Even in that context, because they would have seen it not as something man-made at all.
They would have seen it as something that was produced by divine forces beyond their capacity. But Kasuto was right in the sense that human beings therefore couldn't create something more powerful than them, that even this particular calf would have come from something non-human.
Right, except for that is interpreted through human understanding.
Got it. Okay. I'm gonna have to cut off other comments. You can come and make them to me after the session. I'll be here. I want to take a look. I'm going to skip over the drash because we don't have time. because I want to get to the two pieces of sod here. The two pieces of sod, I think, are very important and very important to the argument I want to make here, so I want to get to them. I'm gonna give you 2 minutes to read.
Oh, we'll read out. We'll read out.
Yeah,
Sure. We got, Artie can start, then Mark can go. Yeah.
perfect. Barrel wine. By the way, before we read barrel wine, it's going to upset you, right? It is a direct, pretty unveiled challenge to Reform Judaism, right? He wrote this almost a generation ago. He doesn't mention Reform Judaism.
Barrel wine's not a Reform rabbi.
Right, it's an Orthodox rabbi, right? It's a pretty clear challenge to Reform Judaism, but because it's a challenge, we need to figure out, so what would you say back to barrel wine? In terms of the idolatry that he is pointing to, is he right? In which case, you're agreeing with his challenge to Reform Judaism, or is he wrong? And if he's wrong, how? Why?
The story of the building of the Golden Calf remains one of the greater mysteries in the Torah and the history of the Jewish people. How could a people that just experienced divine revelation at Mount Sinai immediately refer to pagan worship and form? And just because their leader Moses was late in returning to them, how were they so easily swayed to worship a golden calf? And was it not possible for Aaron, the great and beloved leader of Israel in the darkness of Egyptian slavery, to dissuade Israel from the folly of the golden calf? And finally, why did Aaron himself agree to be a partner to the crime and actually become a participant in the creation of the deadly dove? There may have been many ideas advanced by the Torah commentators over the ages regarding these issues. One approach has been to emphasize how powerful the human expression of free will and personal autonomy is.
It isn't meant to be read by you, Art. Free will.
He's right. All right. We are all aware that all human beings pass through moments of rebellion against authority, parental, governmental, and societal during their lifetime. We would all like to go do it by ourselves without instruction, direction or command. And it makes no difference what it is. We always want to do it our own way. Observe the way a 2-year-old refuses to allow to be fed or insists on walking on his own. This is an expression of the basic human nature of independence and unwillingness to obey the order of others.
Mark, go ahead, Mark, pick it up.
In the 19th century, this human nature of avoidance of instructions from others was raised to a philosophical level by the words and writings of Immanuel Kant and others. The full autonomy of man, even from divine instructions and commandments, was proclaimed as being the most standard of modernity. Even God has no right, so to speak, to tell man what was just and moral and right and good. Mankind, through its own autonomy, would set the moral tone for human life, and man would always be able to innately to choose wisely and beneficially. Well, Auschwitz and the Torah have pretty much laid that theory to rest, though the myth of man's autonomy remains alive and functioning in the Western world even today. Thus, the story of the golden calf is an expression of human rebellion and the wish for complete freedom of choice and action. The Jewish people did not deny the revelation of Sinai. They did object to being commanded to forsake idolatry by God. They denied that God has the right, so to speak, to command them to do anything. Aaron attempted to bring them to the observance of the divine commandments, though their own autonomous behavior, he allowed the calf in order that they should come to reject his folly and falsehood. In that experiment, he failed. Mankind always worships his own creation, no matter how destructive they may be. The lesson of the golden calf is that man cannot be left alone in free autonomy, without instruction and guidance, and be expected to construct the moral world that man aspires to create. The key word in Judaism is
Vitzivanu.
And he commanded us. Without God's commandments and the imposition of his discipline upon man, the world is a very dangerous and bad place. There are many golden calves that pass before our eyes in this society of ours. It is God's commandment that we do not ourselves worship them,
that guarantees the future of Israel and all of mankind.
Right, so provocative, right? So let's first get out from the table. What is he saying? Let's analyze the text. What's the argument here? You read it, analyze it.
That's exactly what we were stating prior. AI cannot be stronger than man, because AI is what man is using to further, to better, to improve upon. It's like fire. Fire was initial, and then we contained it and made it better. AI is the same way. So yes, AI, because we use AI in the business of real estate, which is blocks, we're furthering the progression of it. Now, you still have to come back to, yes, you're gonna have bad people that's gonna do something with it and they'll do other things with it. But a certain part of society will remain good, because that part of society will honor the reverence of God. And that will make them say, okay, when it's bad, we're gonna contain it and bring it back the right way. So I don't think that AI can go bad. I think that people's judgment may go bad, but then coming back to the Lord, those that come back to the Lord, which will overtake that bad, will bring it back good. That's what I think.
And you're relying on the idea that people who are good, as you're describing them, will overwhelm those who don't have such good motivations, right? From God. Of course, the question here that I think that Rabbi Wein is focused on is, how do we ensure that people behave themselves, conduct themselves the right way? So let's go further. Before we say what we think about Rabbi Wein, would somebody give us an understanding in a few words of what is Rabbi Wein's argument here? What exactly is he trying to say to us is the major problem that we really ought to focus upon in the incident of the golden calf? Because when he sees idolatry as being connected to a certain human freedom that he's really worried about. Go ahead.
Well, I don't have a whole study, but one of the core ideas in this is that people object to being commanded. That's a core idea.
People object to being commanded. And because people object to being commanded, as a consequence, they go off the rails when they follow their own lights. If I can point here to the lines which, if I were highlighting this text, I would highlight the second last paragraph, the last 4 lines of the second last paragraph. Mankind always worships its own creations, no matter how destructive they may be. By the way, I actually agree with that statement, that we'll get back to in a minute. The lesson of the golden calf is that man cannot be left alone in free autonomy without instruction and guidance, and be expected to construct the moral world that man aspires to create. I think that's not a bad summary right there of what he's trying to say, right? We could have just brought those few lines. So if I can put into my own words what I think Wein is saying to us, particularly as Reformed Jews who are the inheritors of a Judaism that is indebted to the thinking of Immanuel Kant, right? And the notion of autonomy and the notion of freedom of choice. What he's saying is that is a problem in and of itself. Autonomy and freedom of choice allows people to be sure to make good choices, but it also allows for the converse. People will make bad choices. And way too often in human history, when you give people the choice, we behave like 2-year-olds. That's why he cites 2-year-olds. We behave like 2-year-olds. I want, right? This is back to the immediate satisfaction, gratification of needs, right? I want this, I want that. But that doesn't necessarily lead to any good outcomes. And the only way you get to good outcomes, right? We're worried about good conduct. The only way you get to good outcomes is if people follow rules we know to be good. Replace rules with commandments we know to be good. And therefore, as an Orthodox rabbi, not surprisingly, his recipe is don't follow your own lights. Don't go by what you think is good, because your own individual sense of goodness will lead you down a track, or might well lead you down a track that will be problematic, and more particularly in that last line of the second paragraph, it will be, if we want to construct the moral world that man aspires to create, we can't do that if everybody is following their own autonomous lights. And so what he says is, right, that this is his understanding of Tisa, of the golden calf. The golden calf is a problem, is an idol, because we created something out of our own desires and autonomy and decided to follow our own particular predilections, as opposed to listening to the commandments handed down to us, which were the true path we were supposed to follow, and therein lies the problem. Now we can critique.
Exactly, and then, right,
Equally dangerous ideas. Equally dangerous.
talk a little louder, Zeb, actually.
Two equally dangerous ideas. God's will and free will. As equally dangerous as any idea that human beings ever came up with.
And therefore, the best response, if I'm correct, is you need to be able to have a well-constructed balance between the two.
Well-constructed balance.
Well-constructed balance, okay?
Yeah.
So I just want to add two things. One from, I agree with Rabbi. Nuclear proliferation. If we don't control it, we will basically end up destroying the world.
Right.
That's why we have all these regulations in place, so that not all the countries can basically develop nuclear technology. The second thing about AI, I actually work with AI in the financial world. And the first thing that we had to implement was not actually work with the algorithms, but actually the ethics around that. Because if we don't control or if we don't manage the ethics and who can actually use the technology, it's kind of like what we learned in our previous Torah portion, learned Tamed versus Esh Tamed. It has to be controlled, it has to be regulated. And just yesterday, or day before yesterday, Elon Musk basically sued Sam Altman. I think what Elon was trying, or what they were trying to do, was basically have AI as open source. And that is a very bad thing, because if it is open source, it is going to do a lot more damage.
I don't get too lost in the weeds of AI, because it becomes a technical discussion. But the point you're making, I think, is a very important point, which is it goes back to the question of how do we ensure ethical behavior? Because what you're worried about, appropriately, is we can only know that we'll stay within the bounds of what is appropriate with AI if people behave themselves ethically. But relying on everybody to behave themselves ethically by giving everybody free will, go ahead, you do what you want, but I'm sure you'll do the right thing, is a bit of wishful thinking. That's what Rabbi Wein is saying, right? And therefore, the fundamental approach that Reform Judaism has taken will all give people autonomy. They'll all come up with the appropriate answers. Rabbi Wein is saying here, that's a problematic response. That's why there are commandments. That's why we curb people's desire for gratifying their own predilections. Go ahead.
You know,
I can see you're itching to.
Oh, yeah. Creativity, advancement in science, particularly with what's going on now with gene editing. What he's saying here is that would stifle all that. Where would we be in terms of medicine today and science today if we follow these rules?
So there should be no stifling of scientific advances, even if those scientific advances take us down very dehumanizing tracks.
But does what he says contradict that?
Not necessarily. I'm just asking how far you are prepared to open up the door of freedom.
I'll give you an example. Today, you can take pig valves and put it in people.
Yes.
Orthodox Jews.
Yes.
They don't take that. They won't take it unless they're individually threatened. So my point is this.
Hang on. A pig valve, just to be clear on the halacha here, right? A pig valve is almost always inserted in a life-threatening circumstance, and therefore what you said at the end there is the reason why Orthodox Jews, virtually in every instance I've ever heard of, take it. And by the way, kashrut, as we understand it, is about consumption, about what you eat, not about what you place in your body. So to be very clear, that's not a kosher.
So Arnie.
There are other issues also, gene modification.
Yes.
Editing them. You know what you're gonna get in this patient at this time, but what about 1 or 2 generations down?
Yeah.
Should we not allow ourselves to explore that and help the patient today with the uncertainty of what's down the road? How do you address that?
Don't address, Marty and then Mike.
The concept that humans cannot make decisions that are ethical without a commandment, I think is wrong.
Okay.
Who's making the commandment? Go back to the days of the Inquisition, and you had Torquemada, and you had a clergy that made commandments to the people saying, this comes from God. And we know those were wrong. Okay, it's a matter of principle. I think people are better than that.
Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I would take Marty's comments a step further. I mean, I think orthodoxy poses the greatest threat to our civilization. And I think
Orthodox Judaism or Orthodoxy in general?
in general,
Uh-huh.
in general. And I wanted-
You mean fundamentalism, right?
Fundamentalism.
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure there's a difference between orthodoxy and fundamentalism.
Okay.
And I wanted to just quickly tie it to idolatry. To me, idolatry is the elevation of form over substance. It's the application of judgment. It's the reification of things like the Torah as a thing in itself, ritual, and really the willing suspension of the power of our minds, of our judgment.
Right.
And I also would say that I think there's something missing in the last argument. Because I mean, what he's in effect saying is that the words of the commandments are self-evident and self-explanatory and don't require any intermediation or interpretation, but I think that's wrong. So ultimately, there is some human agency that is bringing necessarily interpretation and explication. So the idea that it's free will that's sort of the end, I think ignores the fact that it is through the exercise of free will that Orthodox rabbis are bringing meaning to these commandments.
Right, so I think that you make some very important points here. I'm always more interested in critiquing ourselves than critiquing people who are not in the room, because I'm sure they would have a response, right? But I could articulate some of it, we won't spend time on that. But in terms of the critique made of Reform Judaism, right? If we turn the lens back on our camp here, his critique is that too much of anything obviously becomes problematic. I'm sure you wouldn't disagree with that, right? So too much fundamentalism, your point, is problematic, right? This gets back to the balance that you were talking about before, right? But too much freedom, and he might be caricaturing, this happens a lot, caricaturing what he thinks non-Orthodox Judaism is about, when it's not really quite that way, but too much freedom where people just go and follow their own views of what is acceptable, or they follow the profit motive, right? The profit motive just says, I'll throw the ethics out the window because there's too much money to pursue here, which does happen, right? That too would be entirely problematic, and that if we live in an environment where people are permitted to rationalize their own behavior, as we're very successful at doing, that then we often end up with circumstances which could well be deleterious to the civilizational outcomes that we are seeking. And what he posits as a result is that the idolatry of loving our own particular decisions because they serve ourselves is what becomes ultimately an undermining feature of our very existence potentially. I want to do one more text so we can fill out the entire view here. Let's do Professor Stephen Geller. Professor Geller, Jewish Theological Seminary, so teachers at the Conservative Movement's seminary. In order to understand Rabbi Geller's, Professor Geller's language here, remember that the golden calf has a very strange place in the Torah. Right? Rabbis are very relieved to get to the golden calf text because, you know, you have a couple of portions of architectural building the Mishkans, like, yeah, that's hard to talk about. And then, oh, golden calf, we can talk about that, right? Great. And then a couple more texts of more building, more of that Mishkan stuff, right? But it's odd, isn't it? Right? Well, why would you embed the golden calf narrative in the middle of this continuum about the creation of the tabernacle? So that's what Professor Geller really wants to.
So Michael, will you start reading for us, and then maybe we'll go to Josh? Harley has a question. Harley, can you hold on your question until we do this last one or no?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Harley. Mike.
What are we reading? There are many things.
The last thing.
Okay, there are many things to be learned from the order of elements in the parasha and their relationship to other things in the context. Most important is that between the account of the divine commission in Exodus 35:31 and its performance in Exodus 35:40, there is in Exodus 32:4 a radically contrastive event, the making of the golden calf and its aftermath. Very striking is the similarity between the initial command in Teruma and the construction of the calf. In the case of the tabernacle, the Israelites are requested, not commanded by God, to offer gold, silver, and bronze. The precious metals are to be offered by those whose heart moves them to donate. In the case of the calf, there is a similar offering, specifically of gold. But this offering is commanded, not recommended by Aaron, and comes specifically from the earrings of the Israelites. The source is ironic because the ear is symbolic of obedience, and by telling them to tear off, piaku, their earrings, Aaron is telling Israel to abandon their allegiance to God. The irony is even greater. At the very moment that Moses is receiving laws about the shrine, cult, and priesthood, Aaron, the future high priest, is abetting apostasy. His later excuse that the calf just came out from the fire rings hollow. I would remind you there is a midrash that Aaron was frightened, but anyway. Now, the source of the metallic offerings, both in the case of the golden calf and the tabernacle, was the precious objects Israel took as spoils from the Egyptians when it left Egypt. There too, there was an element of offering because Exodus 12:36 states that God inclined the Egyptians to be generous with Israel so that they willingly offered them their gold. No doubt they were by now happy to speed Israel on its way at any cost. So the same items were put to two radically different ends: to make the abomination of idolatry and its counter, the sacred shrine and its vessels. The contrastive patterns established by the accounts of the golden calf and the building of the tabernacle suggest that some important theological points are being made.
Josh, can you pick it up, finish it up?
Who's finishing it up? Not me. Oh, me?
Josh Jason. Josh, finish it up. Thanks.
One of these involved the contrast between the nature of the events. The making of the golden calf was the result of blind fear and panic, resulting in hasty, clumsy actions. Unlike Bezalel, Aaron was no craftsman. One can imagine the ridiculously clumsy image he must have made. Afterwards, the Israelites rejoice, but Cecil B. DeMille may have been midrashically correct to depict it on the screen as an orgy. It seems to have consisted
No, keep going, Josh, keep going.
As Moses seems to say to Joshua when he hears the ruckus, Exodus 32:18. The images used present the whole event as an example of chaos. The contrast is with the sense of complete, controlled order in the command to build the Mishkan. God is the architect with the plan, Tavnit, and Moses is to supervise the Malacha with the staff appointed by God, headed by Bezalel. The tabernacle represents the created order that replaced chaos. The golden calf, on the other hand, begins with democracy at its worst. A chaotic, panicked mob that forces a weak leader into foolish, self-destructive action. Against such enslaving chaos, the sacred shrine is held up as a model of ordered, creative freedom.
Right, thank you very much. Now, I think that it's certainly, we certainly get through some complicated material here, but the basic argument that Professor Geller is making as to why we have this contrast between the golden calf, why the golden calf is spot in the middle of this description of the tabernacle. What's the basic point about why it's there?
Like the contrast.
What's the contrast? Contrast between what and what? This might be obvious, but let's get it out on the table here so we can talk about what that portends. Go ahead.
I'm going to pick up on this is a complete argument about free will. And the proof text is it did not come out well. I mean, it was an experiment. We have to have contrast. So God is always saying, I put before you good and evil. Choose good, choose life, choose. So here the Israelites chose this, and what happens? They all die, and they have to eat their gold. And so this is, without this story, making a mikdash doesn't sound quite so important. And it's a YouTube video. I mean, it teaches us. This teaches us. It doesn't teach us against free will. It teaches us against bad consequences of the choices you've made, which God has given you. So I don't get this is an awful story. It was maybe it's exactly what Aaron had in mind. They'll learn, and they're not going to learn through commandments. And we have to come back to the Akedah.
Well, we only have 5 minutes left. Let me pull together some threads here and make some observations about why I think this particular text has specific resonance in the context in which we now find ourselves.
So don't forget that at some point you got Harley and Mike Feinberg, but you should make your comments, then maybe isn't after, right? I'm gonna go do the mitzvah, but.
See you later. No, I'm a yekker. I start on time, I finish on time. We have 5 minutes. So let me say the following. What Professor Geller is communicating to us is that the golden calf is right in the midst of this description about the tabernacle in order to make the contrast between an orderly, rules-based construction that clearly has a godly purpose on the one hand, and a disorderly, haphazard construction, right? He deliberately describes it as the worst craft project ever, right? It came out in this awful way, not designed, not thought through, slapped together by a mob that did not have anything godly about it, but rather had as its chief purpose the notion of creating something that was purely self-serving. Now here, what I think is important to bear in mind is the following. Judaism classically always prefers a middle path between extremes. And while it is true, as people have articulated, that Judaism allows for elements of human freedom, celebrates elements of human freedom. Human free will is a given, a foundational reality of the Torah. It also wants to ensure that human free will is channeled in ways that ultimately will produce an elevated civilization that is reflective of the godly, and therefore calls upon us at times to curb human excesses in the name of bringing us back to a more moral and ethical path that will indeed build that type of society. And so here's where the two extremes end up being problematic, right? If you go down a path, and let me say in-house here, what I won't say outside, I sometimes fear that we go down this more extreme path as Reform Jews. If we go down a path where everybody decides for themselves what they're going to do, it can lead to a cacophonous response that ultimately doesn't ensure the finest ethical and moral outcomes. And on the other hand, the fundamentalist path, as was described before, which leads to the stifling of the ability to really be human and be creative, also is, I think, rejected by these texts. So in our contemporary environment, where our technology now has become so central to how we function as human beings, and I can talk more about that, but let me just throw that statement out there for now. It's become so central to how we function and who we are. I go back to that line from Rabbi Wein, where he says, mankind always worships its own creations, no matter how destructive they may be. Mankind always worships our own creations, no matter how destructive they may be. We become almost oblivious to the way in which our technology begins to undermine our humanity unless we start to ask the right questions about the way in which we would limit, not obliterate or destroy the future of, but limit the application of technologies in such a way as to prioritize humanity and godliness in the context of how we utilize those technologies. So the golden calf, I think, as a singular reminder to us in this technological age, is critically important because it reminds us, or it warns us, about what can happen when we start to focus on the creation of our own hands, our own technological products, as being ends in and of themselves, and being unlimited in the way that we interact with them without ethical or human critique. That becomes idolatrous conduct when it is not directed towards the utilization of those technologies for purposes that are A, good, B, humanly conducive, and C, ultimately responding to what we understand to be the godly ideal. Thank you very much. I'll see you tomorrow morning.
I have a thought for you. Einstein, he helped develop the home. But he told Roosevelt afterwards, if we didn't do it, the Nazis might get it. So he was aware of what you're talking about, right?
Right, but the competitive edge, therefore, then made